Welcome to today's Luohan webinar. It's Ginger from Luohan Academy. And today we're very happy to have Professor Ginger Jin from the University of Maryland to talk about safety reviews on the Airbnb. So Professor Ginger Jin is currently a professor of economics at the University of Maryland and a fellow for Luohan Academy. She's also the advanced professor of College of Behavioral and Social Sciences at the university. From the year 2016 to year 2017, he served as the director of FTC Bureau of Economics. From the year 2019 to year 2020, she was on leave at the Amazon as the Amazon Scholar and Senior Principal Economist. Her research focused on the information symmetry among economic agents and how to provide information to overcome the information problem. Her research has been published in leading economics management and marketing journals. She is currently the co-editor of the Journal of Economics and Management Strategy, and also the associate editor of RAND Journal of Economics, advisory council member of the Journal of Industrial Economics, and board member of the Industrial Organization Society. She has been the research associate of NBER since the year 2012. So without further ado, please join me to welcome our speaker today. Ginger, the floor is yours. Please take it over. Thanks.
Thank you so much, CJ. Can everybody see my slides? Okay, great. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I have to admit that this is my very first time presenting this paper outside of my university, because CJ said that he would prefer a new research. So this is really fresh new. We welcome any questions, comments, criticism, suggestions. Okay, and I know the paper has huge room to improve. So this paper is joined with Erin Kulota, who is a computer scientist at Tulane University, and Yi Sun at Illinois Institute of Technology. She's a PhD candidate there, is on the market this year. And Liata Wegman, who is a faculty at Illinois Institute of Technology as well. I know Eden has joined us in this webinar, so for the questions that I couldn't answer, we can ask Eden on this. I should announce that none of us actually have any relationship with Airbnb. So this is a completely independent academic research, and we don't get data from Airbnb. We actually purchase data from a third party that collects listing information at Airbnb and its competing platforms. So this is a pure academic research. So I'm sure all of you have realized that consumer review is actually a very important feature for online platforms, because consumers can express their authentic view about the product and services they have experienced from online platform. The consumer reviews can form online reputation for sellers, and the good sellers who get good online reputation will be able to stand out over time, and they can grow a lot on the platform. Actually, having many such sellers growing will make the platform growing as well. So this is a virtuous cycle there. So because of that, a lot of platforms actually have gone extra miles to encourage users to post both positive and negative reviews. Many platforms have tried many ways to try to aggregate the reviews in the most informative and visible and convenient way for future users to use those reviews. However, sometimes we also observe platforms, for example, blocking certain reviews. And sometimes that's a legitimate reason, right? Maybe the reviews are fake reviews. Platform will proactively detect and block fake reviews before they become visible to the next user. But sometimes we also see platforms withhold reviews or other information from users, even if those reviews are authentic. So in this paper, we want to look at this withholding issue by using Airbnb as an example. In December of 2019, Airbnb adopts a new review policy, which emphasizes that the reviews should be relevant, okay? What does that mean? For example, contents that refer to circumstances entirely outside of another's control would be removed, according to this new policy effective December 11th of 2019. So for example, a guest may enter a review about the listing's facility. So facility is kind of neighborhood, okay? And this reviews, according to this rule, may become irrelevant and therefore could be subject to platform deletion because it's out of the host control, okay? Although it might be relevant in terms of it's about the neighborhood surrounding the listing. In comparison, the guest reviews about the listing itself would be allowed under this policy, okay? So this might be still too abstract to you. Let me give you some example. We don't know exactly how Airbnb implements this new review policy after December of 2019, but we do observe a few anecdotes showing that the platform does delete some reviews that seems to be irrelevant according to this policy, okay? So for example, in this January 27, 2020 tweet by Patrick R0820, it says, I used Airbnb when we went to Atlanta for the Panthers game. In my review, I left numerous things that could be fixed, as well as the area that is located is pretty sketchy. My review and 4 other similar recent reviews were deleted because it was not relevant. So that's one example. And the second example posted by Avery Bree on May 18th of 2021. This is on tweet because Airbnb will not be able to see such a review, right? Because of the deletion. So this tweet says, Airbnb is such a joke. We literally had a car stolen at a place we stay at, didn't get refunded. And then I tried to leave a review to inform others that it clearly was not a safe area. Cops told us this and other information that I tried to include, and they didn't post. So we don't know exactly how universal the policy has been implemented, but seems like at least the deletion has happened anecdotally, okay? So in this paper, we asked a very simple question. We just want to understand what would happen to the guests, host, and Airbnb as a whole if Airbnb hides or highlights the facility safety reviews. I'm going to define the facility safety reviews later on. Okay, so right now you can just thinking these are the reviews talking about the safety issues around the listing, okay, but not on the listing itself. So we want to understand how do such facility safety reviews affect a listing's price and quantity. How does a guest's own safety experience at an Airbnb listing would affect her future bookings on Airbnb? And how do these effects differ by neighborhood? For example, by high income versus low income neighborhood, by white versus minority neighborhoods. With this information, we're going to run 2 counterfactuals. The first one, we say, okay, what if Airbnb hides all the facility safety reviews we observe in the data? What would happen to the revenues of the listings as well as to the revenue of Airbnb? We also want to simulate another counterfactual, which we call high alert. So that means, what if Airbnb highlight the facility safety review as if the guest has experienced some facility safety event by themselves, okay? And how would that affect the listings P&Q and the total revenue of Airbnb? So maybe let me stop here to see if anybody have any question about the general setup of the study.
I think Xiang Hui raised his hand.
Yeah. Hi, Ginger. Xiang here. So clearly, like, these people's review are going to depend on their expectation of how safe they think the place is going to be, and that expectation might come from their own sort of evaluation. Based on their, whatever information they gather, with just their prior, or it could be based on the host's description, right? So especially in the second case, it's sort of misleading. Like if the host claims that this is a safe place and it turns out to be kind of sketchy, then that's sort of still the host's fault of inaccurate description. So I'm wondering, like, how are you thinking about that?
Definitely, yeah. We're well aware of people's prior here. Of course, we don't observe people's prior, especially not everybody's prior. So thinking about empirical exercise as we track a listing. Okay, suppose a listing description, other whatever observable attributes do not change except for the reviews. So let's say just day one, a safety review comes on board for this listing, how would the future booking of this listing be affected by this safety review? So that's kind of the empirical exercise we have in mind within the listing, okay, assuming everything else is not changing for this listing except for the safety review, and we want to see how the MP and Q changed around this listing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm wondering, do you have a sense of whether the host claims that this is a safe spot or not in the listing?
We have not actually combed the text of the description. I'm not sure whether we have that information in our data set. Yeah, we have not tried to search for certain keywords and stuff, but I think understandably, probably no host would claim that it might be an unsafe place.
Right.
It's just a question of whether they highlight the safety or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
But we know the zip code of the location. We actually later on, I would say that we actually got the actual crime data from city.gov in those cities and in our sample. So we will sort of control for the real crime data from the city.gov. Whether consumers actually observe those crime data or not is another question, right? But we sort of just take that as a control. Even if they understand that, we may still see having or not having a safety review would affect a listing's performance on Airbnb.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, yep, thank you for the question. Any other question, comment?
Yeah, Ginger, I want to ask one clarifying question. So in the description of the policy of Airbnb, it seems to be kind of broader than the safety reviews alone. So is there any other types of or censored things they would do to kind of
yeah, if you look at the policy itself, it's actually very broad. It's basically saying that the review should be relevant. For example, if you comment on sort of the ride-sharing service quality on the way to this listing, it might be regarded as irrelevant because it's about the service of that maybe Uber or Lyft service rather than the Airbnb service. So there are many such examples, and the safety is just one of such example. We look at safety partly because it's possible to detect safety reviews through text analysis. It's also because there has been some high-profile safety events happening on Airbnb listings, which has sort of catch a lot of attention in the media, but no, we haven't seen very systematic study on this at all. Okay, so we just want to sort of just figure out what exactly data says in this regard.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, let me move on to give you some literature review. And there has been a growing literature, both theoretically and empirically, on online reputation based on consumer reviews. The general understanding is that accurate feedback is a public good, and therefore is underprovided. Okay, and for the same reason, many platforms try a lot of ways to encourage buyers to give feedback on the product and services they receive from online platforms. And despite this underprovision, researchers have shown that negative feedback is lower in frequency, but powerful in content, that people seems to react more to negative feedback than to positive feedback. Although buyers actually tend to underreport the bad experiences. And you can imagine all these reasons could make the online feedback system less informative and maybe inflated over time. So there has been studies on this, some even using Airbnb data. So that's the general background. There are also a smaller but fast-growing literature about, from the platform's perspective, how should they handle the negative feedback? Okay, so some of them would argue that, okay, because consumers are more sensitive to negative feedback, and therefore they regard the negative feedback to be more informative. And for that reason, platforms probably should highlight negative feedback in order to alert future consumers when you have law of large number, when you have a lot of transactions, even if every feedback is underreported, then the real quality of the product and services would eventually be surfaced by the online platform if they highlight negative feedback. So that's one view. Another view is that definitely platforms have legitimate reasons to delete negative feedback because they could be abusive, they could be fake, they could be malicious. Okay, so there has been studies on that. And recently we have seen two theoretical arguments saying that platforms may have strategic reasons to omit certain information, including negative feedback, in order to increase their sales. So the most intuitive would be that if they ignore some negative feedback, it may give the impression that the whole platform is sort of high quality and therefore would attract future users. Another example, it could be that Uber actually hide the exact destination of the rider when the driver tried to decide whether to pick up the order or not. Okay, and Uber intentionally doing that because it want to sort of reduce the selection by drivers, because the selection by drivers out of their self-interest may generate bad experience for riders. When you have a lot of, let's say you are a long distance rider, you want to go to a kind of a non-popular corner, and then a lot of drivers may refuse to drive you there, right? And that would give a very bad experience for that rider. By hiding this information, then the platform can speed up the match rate between the rider and the driver and therefore increase the sales. So in those examples, you can imagine that this kind of policy would have very different implications for the two sides of the market as well as for the platform itself. Okay, so with this background, let's get to the data we use. Our data comes from 5 US cities. So that's 5 very large cities, Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and New York. Our Airbnb data is at the listing months level. It came from the third party called AirDNA, who basically have a computer program crawling the website of Airbnb. So we'll have the listing level data. So this would cover the entire home listing, private room listing, shared room listing, or recently they even have hotel room listing. So that's for Airbnb. Airbnb's main competitor in the US is Vrbo, okay? And AirDNA started to collect data on Vrbo from June of 2017 to December 2019. So you can see that we have about 4.5 year data on Airbnb and only about 2.5 year data on Vrbo, okay? And Vrbo only offers entire home listing. There's no private room, share room, hotel room, and so forth. So most of the paper would just use Airbnb data only, but in a small part, as I explain later on, that we think Vrbo might be a competitor that would allow us to think about Vrbo as outside good. Okay, so that's for the listing data. As I said before, we also collect real crime data from those 5 cities. Okay, so the real crime data here include all types of crimes. It could be violence crimes, it could be non-violence crimes. It's basically recorded by the city. Okay, it's by zip code, months. So we match that with the Airbnb data. And I should be clear that the listing of Airbnb do not give us the precise location for private reasons, but it does give us the proxy coordinates. So we know roughly where the listing is, although we don't know exactly where it is. Okay, so that still allows us to match the Airbnb data with real crime data by zip code. It also allows us to know what other listings are surrounding this listings. Okay, so from a guest perspective, you may not only care about whether this listing is safe, but also whether surrounding listings are safe, right? Because surrounding listings safety information may inform you about the whole neighborhood safety around this listing. Okay, so in that sense, the geographic information is sort of important. So in addition to that, we also gather demographic and income information by zip code from census.gov. So this allows us to separate zip codes into high income versus low income within the city, okay? And also separate the zip code into primary white neighborhood versus minority neighborhood. So both dimensions will be cut by the city-specific median. So we have about 50% of the zip code to be high income, 50% of zip code to be low income within the same city, and 50% of the area to be white, and 50% of the area to be minority within the same city. Okay, now let me give you some example of how do those safety reviews read. Okay, so for example, this is a review saying that's good host, very nice, a bit of sketchy area. Okay, another one is saying that this neighborhood made me feel unsafe. So both would be examples of what we call facility safety reviews. There are also other reviews. We call them listing safety reviews. So for example, this one was saying that, okay, the property has key under the mat, check-in process make the person feel unsafe. And the second one is saying that the tub shower is very slippery, and that's about the safety issue within the listing. Okay, so listing safety review is about the safety issues within the property, while facility safety review is about the neighborhood around the listing, but not inside the listing. Okay, so at this point, you must wonder, how can we do this systematically, right? This is why we have a computer scientist as a co-author. We actually use the typical text analysis approach, the lexicon approach. So we set a list of keywords for facility safety keywords. We also have some keywords for listing safety keywords. In addition to this two lists, we have a list of facility location keywords. So this could be street, neighborhood, area, and so forth. Then we say, okay, if the facility safety keywords like unsafe appear together with a location keywords like neighborhood or street within a 20-word window, then we say this review is about facility safety review. If the safety keywords appear outside of 20 words window of the location keywords, then we regard it as a listing safety review. So by this criteria, we're able to match about 70K facility safety reviews and 1.5K listing safety reviews. However, these account for only a very small fraction of 5.8 million reviews in our data. So roughly speaking, we only have about 1.23% of guest reviews are related to safety at all, according to our criteria. And we have done some hand check on a random sample of this and just do manual check of whether this is the real classification that we want the safety review to belong to. And that check have found accuracy rate to be about 86%. And within the safety reviews, we have identified over 99% of them are facility safety reviews. So it's actually very, very rare to have a safety review, just talking about the listing specific and safety is mostly about the safety of the facility around the listing. And over the whole data of Airbnb listing months, we have about 18% of them have any facility safety reviews in the past in our data set since May of 2015. So just on review itself, it's very rare, but we do have a decent fraction of listings that have any cumulative facility safety reviews in our data set. Okay, and in terms of keywords, for example, sketchy is one of our safety keywords. Slippery is one of the listing safety review keywords. Okay, and these are the frequencies of our keywords being discovered in our matched data. So you can see unsafe appear very high frequency, sketchy, rough, safety, dark. I mean, of course, some of those words like poor may not indicate safety, right? So this is sort of the noise in our data. We have done our best, but there are like millions of reviews here. So this is sort of the best we can do. If you have any idea of how we can improve the precision of our data, we really love to hear about this. Okay, so that's for the facility safety reviews. And these are the keywords for the listing safety reviews. You can see that's unsafe, hazard, slippery appear quite often. Okay, so this graph is showing you the percentage of facility and listing safety reviews over time in our data. Okay, if you look at the blue curve first, this is saying that's on roughly every month, we observe about 1.2% to 1.4% reviews to be facility safety reviews. And this kind of going down slightly over time from 2015 to 2020. Okay, and the vertical line here is the adoption date of the new Airbnb review policy. And then this orange line is percentage of listing safety reviews. And this should be read against the right vertical axis. You can see that's the percentage of reviews to be listing safety reviews is really, really small, okay? And that's increasing over time. Okay, and I told you that we actually have the real crime data. So we can check the correlation between the real crime data and the safety review data in Airbnb, okay? But these two are of very different scales, right? Because the number of reviews that qualify to be our safety reviews is small and also is kind of gradually accumulating over time. But the real crimes are kind of, you can think of, it just randomly happens, right? And it could have very different counts in different cities. So what we do is within each city, we rank the zip code according to their real crime data, as well as according to their Airbnb safety review data. Then we compute the correlation on their decile, on their percentiles in those two measures, okay? So you can see that in this picture, we have the red curve and orange curve. These are the curves showing the correlation between zip code crime data and zip code safety review data for low income zip code and for minority zip code. Okay, so the red one is for low income zip code. The yellow one is for the minority zip code. And you can see the correlation between the real crime and Airbnb safety reviews is about 0.4. At the beginning of our data set, it increases to about 0.6 at the end of our data set, okay? So we're actually quite amazed by this correlation because we know how sparse the safety review is, but seems like the correlation does confirm that's the safety, the crowdsourced safety reviews, despite its noise, is indeed correlated with the real crime data. Okay, and then the blue and gray curves here are showing the correlations between real crime and Airbnb safety reviews for high income areas and predominantly white areas. And you can see the correlation there is much smaller. It's basically between 0.1 and 0.3. It's also slightly increasing over time. So we think the increasing trend is making sense because imagine that safety event itself is a small probability event. It happens randomly. Not all guests would enter the review on Airbnb after such experience, right? So you would have this safety issues just gradually accumulating on Airbnb. So every listing start as a clean listing, and then over time it may have some safety issues, right? So so it's sort of not surprising that over time we see more and more correlation between the safety reviews and the real crime data, and especially in the low income and minority areas, because in these areas the actual crime data is higher. Okay, let me stop here to see if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, Ginger, I think there's two questions in the chat room. So one is that how were the keywords chosen? The second question is that if we were to use a slightly different set of keywords, would the results still hold?
I think we have tried sort of trial and error, I guess, like initially come up with a small list of keywords and then run the program and then do some manual checks, see if that makes sense. And in that process, may discover more relevant keywords and keep on adding those keywords. So this is the result of those iterations. Idan, do you have anything to add there?
Yes, we have we first have manually identified 100 safety reviews and pull out their keywords. And then we use a lexicon approach, which means we have their superordinate and subordinate words, and in our target words set, and therefore that's why we have 36 keywords for the safety review, and six and some listing safety review, listing safety keywords.
Yeah,
after we have the keywords, then we do when we apply those algorithms to all the reviews and find out the safety reviews and check the accuracy for those selected safety reviews manually and find 86% of accuracy.
Yeah, so thank you, Idan. So this definitely is a process of trial and error. If anyone knows a better algorithm, we'll be happy to hear about it.
Yeah, and also Ginger, can you go back one slide?
Okay, sure. Let me see. Oh, oops. This one?
Yeah. So, so the vertical line is kind of the date where this policy is implemented.
Yeah.
Then from this graph, it seems that the facility safety review percentage is not declining or stay the same.
Yep.
So they are not kind of filtering those kind of reviews right after the date, or?
Yeah, that's a good observation. We don't know exactly how they implement the policy, so we regard our data as all before the policy. Okay, and right after December of 2019 is the pandemic, so we really don't think that's sort of the same world. So think our data are all before. We'll just try to infer what would happen if Airbnb strictly enforce that policy. Whether they indeed strictly enforce that policy or not, we just don't know.
Okay. And also there's another question from the chat room from Ling Yun. Some of the reviews may have restrained phrasing. For example, staying safe or not safe or unsafe. How have this kind of keyword being handled? And this may introduce some selection bias into the data, right? Yeah.
That's a good question. I think Aaron, our co-author in computer science, actually had some program try to purge out those sort of false positive. So he has a program doing that. I don't know sort of exactly how successful that is, but that's sort of part of the algorithm contributing to the overall 86% of accuracy. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true, right? Imagine somebody writing a review saying, oh, we had a good time watching a crime movie about unsafe street, right? And then we will be detecting the unsafe street there as if it's a facility safety review. So we do have some program to try to purge out those false positives. Okay, I will move on then. Okay, so I think every one of you probably know what Airbnb is. This table just gives you some highlight of the difference between facility safety listings versus normal listings. Okay, so we define a listing to be facility safety listing if it had any review that we tag as facility safety review. Okay, so you can see that the occupancy rate of facility safety listings is a little higher. It's 0.67 versus 0.53. They're much cheaper. They're the average night price is $143 versus $168. By definition, all of them have facility safety review cumulatively, okay? And only 1.7% of them also have listing safety reviews, but this percentage is much lower in a normal Airbnb listing, okay? And then because the occupancy rate is higher, we see the number of reviews to be higher for facility safety listings. And we also see this kind of listings have a higher number of listings within 0.3 mile radius that also facility safety listings, okay? And because they're located probably in some riskier neighborhood, and so it's common to observe other listings that's close to them also being tagged as facility safety listings, okay? And we have the real crime numbers. So this is cumulative count of crime from May of 2015. So you see this number is much higher than this number for normal listings. And the median income in the zip code for facility safety listing is lower, is 49,000 versus 58,000. And these facility safety listings are more likely to be located in a zip code with less fraction of white population as compared to the normal listing. And the other variables here are indicating whether we observe any cross-listing between Airbnb and Vrbo, whether it's an entire home listing or not. So overall, I think Airbnb listing only have cross-listing by percentage of 10%, but we only observed Vrbo in 2017 to 2019. So this number is underrepresented because the Airbnb data has 2 more years before 2017. Okay, I observe a chat. Okay, so I'll read the question. I think Professor Jin misunderstood my question. I think the current keyword selection may have missed some of the negative reviews because the wording of the review emphasized on ways to stay safe, which is an indirect way to saying the facility or the listing is in fact unsafe. Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's, I think we may have a lot of false negative here. That's we're not being able to catch sort of the hinted safety issues from the text of the reviews. Lingyun, is that what you mean? Okay, yes. Yeah, definitely. That's, I think we try to be conservative and only tag the reviews that we think are indeed safety reviews. So we're going to miss probably some more subtle messages. The point is that I think later on, we believe the data actually show that people are sensitive to such safety reviews as we identified. So it does suggest something that's in consumers' preference. Okay, so our empirical exercise is actually very simple. First, we start with a reduced form market outcome exercise. We try to see, okay, within the same listing, if that listing have facility safety reviews or listing safety reviews, how would that affect the listing's average price and occupancy? Okay, and then we also try to identify the guests who have entered a review complaining about facility safety issues. So these are the guests, assuming the review is authentic, these are the guests who actually experience a safety concern themselves in the neighborhood. Then we try to track them to see, okay, to what extent do they still book on Airbnb in the future? And if they book on Airbnb listings, what kind of listings do they choose to book on, and so forth. So we hope that would give us some sense of how their preference have been changing because of this safety event. And based on that, we can do some back of envelope calculation in terms of how host, consumer surplus, or Airbnb's overall general booking value would change when Airbnb adopt different policies about this kind of safety reviews. Okay, so let me show you the reduced form outcome first. So this actually is very straightforward. Thinking observation is a listing months. the dependent variable is just P or Q. We're going to control for the listing fixed effects. Okay, we're going to control for the time fixed effects and so forth. Okay, even city trend. And then we're going to control a lot of observable characteristics of the listing. So this could be the number of reviews and whether the host is a super host and so forth. Okay, and then we're going to control for the real crime data in that zip code of that listing. This will be lagged from last month. Okay, we also have a dummy indicating whether this listing had any listing safety reviews in the past. Okay, so this could be about a slippery tub. And then we also have a separate variable indicating whether this listing has any facility safety reviews in the past. So this could be complaining about the area to be sketchy or unsafe. In addition to all of that, we also have a separate variable saying that's, okay, if we draw a 0.3 mile radius around this focal listing, we can calculate how many of other listings in this circle are also having some facility safety listing reviews. Okay, so this is trying to, if people are searching and they search for the nearby listings, they observe some safety reviews there, they may infer the neighborhood for this listing is unsafe. So we allow that possibility. Okay, so that's the main variables. And let me show you the results. So the first column is, you can think of this as Q. So that's log occupancy rate for listing months. The second column is the log price. So the variables we highlight here are the facility safety review dummy for this listing and the listing safety review dummy for this listing. Okay, both of them appear to be very negative. So this basically saying that if this listing have a facility safety review, it's going to reduce its occupancy rate in the future. It's also going to reduce its average night price in the future. We control for the area's crime data. Okay, so that's the first variable, the log crime whole cumulative normalized. And we were expecting to see negative signs, and we do see that on the price, but the occupancy rate is showing positive sign. Okay, and we don't know exactly how to interpret that, but we take this variable as a control. You can imagine that, for example, in downtown area of Chicago, there are a lot of listings, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of traffic there. And that's why it has a lot of crime as well, okay? And it's hard to interpret this correlation. So I would like you to just thinking this as a background control. And all these regressions are already controlled for property fixed effects, time city fixed effects, and so forth. Okay. So if we interpret those numbers, you can see that within the same listing, having any facility safety review is going to reduce the listing's monthly occupancy rate by about 1%, is going to reduce the average paid price per night by about 1.3%. In comparison, having a listing safety review has even stronger negative effects. It's going to relate it to 2.6% drop in occupancy rate and 1.7% drop in price. So both of them indicating that people are indeed sensitive to this kind of safety reviews, despite its sort of infrequent occurrence in the data. Okay, and people seems to be more sensitive to the listing safety reviews than to the facility safety reviews. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? The listing safety review is definitely a problem for this listing. The facility safety review, it may not be directly on this listing, it's just the surrounding area. Okay, we have done a lot of additional robustness checks. For example, we have looked at the subsample of listings with any positive occupancy rate. Within this subsample, we do see the crime rate to have a negative impact on both occupancy and price. We also add controls on sort of the length of the reviews and the whether the host has managing multiple property or not. We don't find those variables to change our results in any qualitative way. We also split the sample by the median number of reviews, because some listings may be very busy, right? They have a lot of reviews. Then even if they have those safety reviews may not appear on the first page, so that users may not observe those safety reviews because they just sort of appear in a chronicle order. We do observe the safety review dummies to have less effect for very high occupancy listings. So that does confirm that that hypothesis. We have run this in many subsamples for heterogeneous effect in high income versus low income, white versus minority, for the entire home listing or for private room listing and so forth. But the message is always the same. It seems like people do care about the safety reviews in the listing. When safety review happens, then they react negatively. Okay, so that's the general market outcome results. Maybe I should stop here to see if anybody have any question. Okay, if not any question, I will continue. So far we have looked at overall market outcomes in P and Q. Now we want to zoom in to see what if a guest have a real experience of safety issues on Airbnb stay. How would that affect this guest's future booking? And how can we do that? This is sort of a data challenge because our data is organized by listing, not by guests. So if a guest make a reservation, have a stay, but do not leave any review, we actually don't observe this guest in our data, okay? So we can only track the guest according to the reviews that he or she has left on Airbnb. So the average review rate is about 50 to 60% on Airbnb. So it's probably high as compared to other platforms, but still not as high as 100%. So this is sort of imperfect tracking of guests. To the extent we can track a guest, we look at the guest who has written the facility safety review themselves, okay? We assume those reviews to be authentic, so that means the guest who wrote that review has experienced that safety issue, okay? Then we call these guests to be facility safety guests, so that's treated guests, okay? Then we look for the control guests who have similar attributes in our data, but have not written any safety reviews. And then we compare the treated and control guests to see, okay, if they appear similar before this treatment, do they appear different after the treatment? Does that make sense? Okay, so so we restrict our treated guests to be those who have written at least 3 reviews on Airbnb before posting the first facility safety reviews. We just want to avoid sort of novice guests who don't know what's going on Airbnb and may have random complaints. So these are at least somewhat seasoned guests, and therefore we assume their facility safety review is authentic. Okay, and then we look for 2 nearest of neighbors for each treated guest. And then we compare their observable attributes, such as the reservations they have made before, and the average number of crimes for the listings that they have reserved before, and whether those listings have facility safety reviews, the percentage of listings in that zip code that have facility safety reviews, and so forth. So you can see that we see pretty comparability between treated guests and control guests. So with that, so this is just the distribution of propensity score of being a treated guest in our data. So upper is for the treated users, below is for the matched control users. So you can see the 2 distribution are pretty similar to each other. Okay, so with that, we just run a very simple DID regression. So the dependent variable would be, okay, the number of reservations this guest has made on Airbnb in each month, okay, before and after treatment. If they make any reservation, what's the average crime data for that booked listing, and whether that listing have any facility safety review cumulatively, and what's the percentage of listings in that zip code that have facility safety reviews, and whether any listings in that zip code have listing safety reviews, and whether there's a dummy of whether the booked listing has facility safety reviews. So these are all indicators of sort of how risky the book the listing is, okay? This is from column 2 to 6. These are conditional and they still book anything on Airbnb. Well, the first column is indicating how many they're making reservation, including 0, okay? So the treated is just a dummy identifying our facility safety users, and post is a dummy after they have written their first safety reviews, and then interaction is just a treated times post, okay? So these are the highlighted are the DID coefficient. This basically saying that's okay. On average, the probability of making reservations would go down over 30% after a facility safety guest experience a facility safety review on Airbnb. However, if they continue to book any listing, they're going to book in a listing that's much less likely to have crime in that neighborhood, real crime in that neighborhood, okay, and less likely to book the listings that have facility safety reviews, much less to book a listing in the area with facility safety reviews or facility listing reviews and so forth. So this basically is saying that's after having self-experience of a safety event on the Airbnb listing, they're less likely to book on Airbnb in the future. And if they book, they're going to try to avoid unsafe areas. Okay.
One question, Ginger. It's
Yes.
Ginger from. First, I'm a little bit confused. I thought you just mentioned you don't have the guest level data, or. But,
well, we have.
Then you have the name of who posted what or ID. You can track.
Yeah, we have imperfect data on guests, I should say.
I see.
We do have the reviewer's ID, which I believe is unique for a guest, but a guest may not enter a review after every staying. So we only observe,
and also,
yeah.
Also for the future behavior, because the listing data is only for 5 major cities, right? So.
Right.
So is it possible that they just don't book in, they just don't travel to these cities, or because we only observe their reservation in these cities, or I'm wrong?
Yes. That's definitely a limitation of our data, that we can only tell the extent to which they continue to book in those 5 cities. They could be avoiding these 5 cities, for example.
And also, can you explain a little bit how you define this control group and treatment group? Because I think it's a very smart design.
Yeah, so I will describe it, Eden, and correct me if I'm wrong. So suppose we observe this guest have been entering reviews on Airbnb, and then in the middle of his history, one of his review is actually talking about facility safety issues, right? We know exactly the timing of that facility safety review. Let's say that's April of 2017, okay? Then this is a treated user. Then we're looking for the control users who have comparable history of review before this date, right? So those control reviewers probably also have reviewed similar number of reviews in our data set. And then sort of we know where they have stayed, right? So we also can compare sort of the safety level of those listings between the treated users and the potential control users. And then once we sort of compare those attributes and sort of decide they're comparable, and then we say, okay, that's the nearest neighborhood, and I should say that's the nearest neighbor of the treated user. Okay, so we define that as a control user for this treated user. Okay, so we try to come up with 2 controls for each treated user. And then we'll say, okay, the treated user has the treatment in April 2017. So we would say hypothetically, the control user may sort of have this post dummy equal to 1 after that date as well. And then we compare their bookings after this date to see whether they differ. Does that make sense? And we do this exercise
Yeah.
for every
Thank you.
user.
Yeah. Thank you.
Besides that, we also control the number of reservations before their first safety review, and we only keep those that have at least 4 reservations before their first monthly safety reviews at those 5 cities, and therefore we can say that those users are frequently traveler to those 5 cities.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ida. Okay,
Sure.
any question? Okay, so I will continue. Following that same DID framework, we also look at the cross-neighborhood effect. So supposedly a treated user experienced the event in a high-income zip code, okay? Then we ask the question, okay, in the future bookings of this user, are they more or less likely to book a listing in high-income zip code? The answer is negatively, okay? So if they have experienced a safety issue in a high-income zip code, they will try to avoid the high-income zip code in the next booking, okay? However, if they have experienced a safety issue in the low-income area, they're going to increase their booking in a high-income area in the future bookings. Does that make sense? So they basically try to avoid the area that they feel unsafe according to their self-experience. Okay, you observe very strong patterns like this. That's they experience something in this type of zip code, they try to avoid that zip code, and then they try to go to the opposite type of zip code. Okay. So just in summary, we observe the treated guests, the facility safety guests are less likely to book future stays on Airbnb. And then when they do book, they tend to do so in an area with fewer crimes and fewer facility safety reviews. And facility guests who post their first facility safety reviews in a high income area would book fewer stays in that high income area and move to the low income area. Okay, so you observe this pattern for white versus minority as well. Okay, so these are sort of just the basic empirical results. Oh, I see a question from Ling Yun. The next time they book and leave a review. Yes, yeah. And when we say their future bookings, we can only detect their future bookings through their future reviews. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so based on that, we're going to have some back of envelope calculation. Okay, so back to the big picture, we want to understand what if Airbnb strictly enforced the policy by eliminating all the facility safety reviews. So this is a lower bound. We're going to call it no disclosure. And then we could also look at a higher bound, say, what if Airbnb would highlight the safety reviews so that all guests will be as sensitive to the facility reviews as the treated users in our data, okay? So we're going to call that high alert scenario. Okay, so because we already have the empirical results of P and Q, which would depend on the number of safety reviews on the right-hand side, right? So if we have no disclosure possibility scenario, we can just shut down the facility safety reviews on the right-hand side and calculate how would the price change, how would the Q change, and that would give us the yellow highlighted number. So on average, we have about the total general booking values to go down about 0.5%, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, to go up 0.5%. And that's because those safety reviews would have negative impact on P and Q. So if we get rid of them, then it's going to increase the P and Q, okay? It's actually going to increase the revenue for the facility safety listings more, because these are the ones who suffer from those negative signals, right? If we remove those negative signals, then they will benefit most from those things. For the normal listings, they themselves do not have the facility safety review themselves. However, their surrounding listings may have some facility safety reviews. So this negative effect coming through the shutdown of the facility listing reviews in their nearby listings. So overall, this no disclosure scenario would increase the general booking value of Airbnb by about 0.5%. In contrast, if Airbnb ends up highlighting those facility safety reviews so much, just as if all the guests are sort of the treated guests in our data, Then we see the overall general booking review. The overall general booking value of Airbnb would go down about 8%. Okay, this is largely because the treated users would reduce their future booking on Airbnb. So imagine if every guest is like the treated guest here, then when they look at the safety reviews in the listings, they're going to be more sensitive to the safety reviews in those listings, right? They also probably would have a slightly negative perception of the overall Airbnb platform, and therefore will reduce their probability of making any booking on Airbnb. So that's all contributing to about 8% of declining in the general booking value of Airbnb. So this is just the overall results. And so we're not satisfied with this back of envelope calculation because it does not give us a very detailed information about the sorting effect, right? And you can imagine that, okay, some facility safety listings, they have those facility safety reviews, that's a negative signal. If you highlight those negative signal, indeed, people would avoid those listings, but they do not necessarily avoid Airbnb, right? They may go to other listings that do not have facility safety reviews. And from the platform's perspective, this sorting effect may be large enough that they actually want to highlight the facility safety reviews in order to channel people towards the better listings. So we want to really understand the sorting effect. We also want to understand kind of the overall revenue change. For example, in a high alert situation, when the guest ends up avoiding any Airbnb listing, that's going to be a shrinkage for the overall demand of Airbnb, right? And that's different from the sorting effect. So we sort of want to get a sense of that. We also want to understand, like, to what extent consumers would benefit or lose from such information regimes. And to do that, we sort of need a framework thinking about, okay, how would a consumer derive utility from a listing depending on the information in front of them and so forth. So therefore, we sort of try to push this a little structurally, thinking about consumer choice of Airbnb listing as a discrete choice. Okay, and we're just going to focus on the entire home because for the private rooms and other things, we don't know the outside good. And we think customers that are using private room might be different from the customers using entire homes. Okay, so right now, just focus on entire homes. The inside good will be Airbnb listings of entire homes, while the outside good will be the verbal listing in the same zip code and months. Okay, and because we want to cover both Airbnb and verbal, we can only look at the last 2 years of our data. Okay, and then this is a standard discrete choice model, right? The utility would depend on the property, observable characteristics would depend on the price, it would depend on the real crime of that data, it depends on whether this listing has listing safety reviews or facility safety reviews and the surrounding safety review listings. Okay, and this would give the average utility for this listing, and then consumer looking at the competing listings will choose the one that maximizes her utility. Okay, so with that, and here's the estimation, because the price will be endogenous here. So we actually instrument the price by, remember, we're looking at the entire home listing price. So we're using the private room listing price in the same area as the instrument for the entire home listing price. Okay, so the first column is just showing that it's indeed very strongly correlated between the IV and our price. And you can see the F statistics is over 300. So that's validate our first stage. And then the second column is showing the utility regression. You can see that people are very sensitive to price, okay? And then they put negative, they have negative coefficient on whether this listing has a facility safety reviews or the listing safety reviews. And this is consistent with the reduced form data we have seen before, okay? So this would give us sort of, we translate the observable attributes into the consumer utility. Now we have to aggregate all those into the consumer welfare, okay? To do that, it's very important to realize that there is this perceived utility versus actual utility. So let me go through that concept. So imagine the guest has full information, the actual safety level of the listing, and say this is the downward sloping demand curve. Okay, then if this is a full information equilibrium, then the price will be here and the quantity will be here. Okay, everybody is happy. And however, if the user does not have full information, let's say the user does not recognize the safety risk in that area, then the perceived demand might be higher, right? So the perceived demand here, I'm drawing it as the red curve. And because the consumer thought the place is safer than it actually is, the demand is kind of inflated. And then the host is able to charge a higher price. So now let's say the market equilibrium ends up to be a higher price and higher quantity. Okay, am I making sense here? Okay, so however, this red curve is a perceived utility, not the actual utility, right? It's kind of the not truly authentic utility. So when we calculate the consumer surplus, we have to look at kind of the actual utility consumers really enjoy when they book the listing. So what's the actual utility? Okay, so they perceive the demand is here, but the actual demand is here, right? So then you will have two types of people. The people in the yellow area, these are the people who are willing to pay above the less information price. However, their willingness to pay is not as much as the perceived utility. So their consumer surplus is actually this yellow area, okay? And then you'll have other people who sort of deceive into booking in such listing, because if they know the full information, they would not book that listing according to the market price. But now they thought the area is better, so they booked the listing, but their actual utility is lower than the price they actually pay. So these are the people who actually suffer by making those bookings. So the total consumer surplus here is actually the yellow area minus the green area. Making sense? Okay, so we should compare that with the consumer surplus under full information. What's the consumer surplus under full information? That's this purple triangle area, right? And that's because the full information would lower the price, would only attract the people whose true willingness to pay is above this price. So the consumer surplus change here is basically yellow minus green as compared to the purple triangle. So that's the consumer surplus. So back to our situation, we observe the status quo, which is probably partial information, okay? And if we continue to hide the information, that's the no disclosure scenario. If we highlight that information, that's the high alert scenario, okay? So we're gonna assume the high alert scenario would give us the real utility, okay? Then we're gonna calculate the consumer surplus according to that real utility. Okay, so with that, and here's the result, okay? And so we calculate the consumer surplus in status quo in high alert situation with and without endogenous price change, in the no disclosure situation with and without a price change. Then we compare those scenarios with the status quo, okay? And we do that calculation for all types of listings together. Then we come up with this overall number. So this is basically saying that's if we move to the high alert scenario, then consumer welfare would increase, because now they know the truth, right? They're going to make their informed decision. And so we show that their consumer surplus would go up by about 0.2%. But if they got into this no disclosure scenario, that's like less information than the status quo, right? So we find that they're going to suffer in losing the consumer surplus by about 0.08%. Okay, and this happens is because there's some sorting effect. If you look at the market shares, okay, so here we give you the market share in our data, so that's a status quo, okay? So average verbal has about 39%, the normal listings on Airbnb have almost half, and then we have 14% by the facility listings on Airbnb. If we have a high alert situation, then of course the demand on the facility listings would go down, right? Because people would avoid those kind of listings, but a lot of them would switch to the normal listings on Airbnb, and just a tiny fraction would switch to verbal. Okay, so this is showing that most of the effect here will be sort of sorting effect within Airbnb. with only a little leakage to verbal. And if we do the no disclosure, you see the opposite, because no disclosure would hide those safety review information. Now you have the listing with facility safety reviews enjoy a little higher market share. And that's partly because people are moving from the normal listing to the facility safety listings, and verbal also see their market share go down a little bit. Okay, so now you probably wonder, like, why these numbers look so small, especially for the high alert situation, because previously we actually showed that the Airbnb seems to suffer about 8% revenue in the high alert. We think the difference here is probably because our utility framework cannot include hotel as outside good. Okay, if we just look at the people who booked on Airbnb or verbal, we don't see a huge shifting between Airbnb and verbal when you change the information. However, in our DID results, we think some of the treated users, when they avoid booking on Airbnb, they probably also avoid booking on verbal at all. Okay, so a lot of those leakages will not be captured by our utility framework because we just don't have hotel data to capture that, that switching out. Okay, so just in summary, we show that both facility and listing safety reviews affect Airbnb listing. It has negative impact for both P and Q, and we see stronger effect from the safety reviews on the listing itself. And we also see the guests who experience the facility safety events themselves have heightened sensitivity to crime and facility safety review data afterwards. They're less likely to book future stays on Airbnb. And when they use Airbnb, they tend to book in areas with fewer crimes and fewer safety reviews. And we find more disclosure of facility safety reviews actually would affect the host in low-income area, in minority areas more. And that's because the safety listings are more likely to appear in those areas. So the information regime is going to affect them more just by design. Okay, and we see that for Airbnb as a platform, their general booking value would increase if they hide the safety reviews, but they're going to see some sorting. Okay, some sorting towards the listings with facility safety reviews. However, if we go to the high alert situation, the overall GBV would go down, and it would go down for both type of listings. Okay, and then in terms of consumer surplus, consumer will be a little better off in a high alert situation, a little worse off in the no disclosure situation. So you guys already identified a lot of limitations in our study. That's we may not observe how hosts reply to those safety reviews, right? Because it may not appear in our data, but it could change users prior if such reply matters. We can only track a guest reservation when she posts a review in our 5 cities and within our sample period. And we don't know whether guests are more or less likely to post subsequent reviews after posting their first facility reviews. We're sort of assuming the review rate itself does not change, but that's assumption, not a finding. Okay, we don't have the hotel listings, so that's sort of limit our ability to tell to what extent the demand will switch completely out of the online platforms. And we don't know exactly how Airbnb implement this policy. So all the scenarios I'm describing here are kind of hypothetical predictions. So I would welcome any questions, comments, or future directions that you think we should go.
Yeah, thanks, Ginger. Very interesting. I think we still do have some time for the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Yeah, maybe I can start with one question. So in your conclusion, you mentioned about the changing GBV and also the change in customer surplus. I'm wondering how does that kind of the change in the kind of a GBV kind of allocate towards platform revenue or host revenue and customer surplus?
I think Airbnb they basically have a commission rate out of the total revenue. Okay, so that number should be just proportional to the number I show you. On the host, you basically see differential effects, right? Because you're going to see some sorting. When you hide the information, that's kind of more favorable to the listings that have the safety reviews, then you're going to see those kind of hosts benefit from hiding the information, while other listing will be worse off, right? Because the demand will switch away from them. But overall, for example, the high alert scenario is going to hurt both of them because it's going to reduce the overall demand for the platform, because users may become so alerted that they're just going to avoid booking on Airbnb at all. So that's going to hurt both type of hosts. But exactly the same regime might be welcomed by consumers, right? Because we're measuring the consumer surplus according to their real utility, not the perceived utility. So you basically really see the trade-off here between the consumers and host and the platform. And I didn't highlight a lot here, but you also see a trade-off between different neighborhoods, because the facility safety reviews tend to appear in the low income and minority areas. Then certain information regime like no disclosure is going to benefit them, right? You're going to benefit the neighborhood, but maybe at a cost of the potential safety issue of the guests who enter those listings. And then in contrast, the listings in the white area and high income area may enjoy, well, not exactly enjoy, but may suffer relatively less in the high alert situation because they themselves do not have many safety reviews and their neighbor listings do not have many safety reviews. So you really see sort of all those parties going to have quite different economic calculation here.
Yeah, and will this kind of related to the fact that the Airbnb does not really kind of implement this policy after that date, right? You see the kind of very kind of earlier figure, the fraction of listing with kind of vicinity safety reviews is kind of stable even after the date. Yeah, maybe this kind of consideration is a little bit hard for them as well.
Yeah. I mean, according to our calculation, if we just consider the effects we show here, then implementing that policy would benefit them in terms of revenue. Of course, there might be other costs, right? That's some guests may get upset, like the tweets I showed you.
Yeah, Ginger. So I think this is very interesting, and I think it's very much, my comment is very much related to what you just said, which is like if you can say a little bit more about what happens to hosts, especially the dynamics of hosts, that will be make the paper even better. Because like if I think about the big picture, whenever a platform wants to hide some information or decrease the granularity of data, it's always having in mind that, you know, on one hand there's this information which benefits consumer, but then on the other hand, by putting this sort of low quality firms with high quality firms, then it can sort of help them in terms of their growth, cold start and stuff. So it might be, so I think right now, much of the analysis focuses on the consumer side. So it might also be interesting to say more about sort of the host side.
Yeah, I should say that's our reduced form market outcome regressions on P&Q. They're talking about kind of the market equilibrium, right? It could be driven by the guest information understanding. Is also driven by host strategy of pricing and claiming their property and so forth. So I do think this is just my personal speculation that I saw Airbnb adopt this relevant review policy because they want to use the reviews to mostly motivate the host to sort of keep their listing clean, right, and keep their listing safe. But the host can do nothing about the neighborhood their property is located in. So in that sense, that's the reviews may give information to consumers, but do nothing about the host incentive. But of course, from the consumer's perspective, even if the host can do nothing about it, that information may still be relevant, right? And they would want to know that information. So I think it's really kind of like which side are you going to
Sure.
right, or how are you going to trade off between the two sides who may have different interests on the same subject?
Yeah, and the thing about safety is that it's also highly subjective, right? So sometimes, like when a buyer rates a property to be unsafe, it could be that the property is really unsafe, or it could be that he or she feels that it's unsafe.
Right.
So I was just thinking, because I live in St. Louis, so like whenever people talk about St. Louis, they think that it's a dangerous city, but it's actually very segregated in the sense that East St. Louis is terrible. If you go there, you don't want to go there. But if you look at like cities within St. Louis County, that's like Clayton or Central West and University City, that's actually relatively safe. So maybe like I don't think this is a major thing to do, but like maybe look at regions where people think that it's sort of unsafe, but in fact it's actually safe, to sort of maybe get a sense of whether consumers are just being sort of unreasonable and sort of just use their heuristics when they rate a property being unsafe, or that according to the crime data it's actually unsafe. Because we kind of want to, I think it was Airbnb's intention to get rid of the first sort of, I guess Airbnb is trying to get rid of both things because seller cannot control for both. But if we can say something about, which part of the consumer reports is sort of real versus just sort of imaginary, then might be interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a very good challenge for a computer scientist to tell the real versus imaginary complaint. Yeah. But in general, we do see a positive correlation, sometimes pretty strong correlation between the safety reviews and the real crimes. So I think, like when we have enough sample, I think the reviews does contain some information about the safety.
Hi, Ginger. Very exciting work. I have many questions, actually. I will ask the first two first. First is about I think it's quite impressive of the social learning, the correlation curve. It increased from 0.4 to 0.6. I saw you would do something to explain that later, but I didn't see. But actually, I think it's quite informative. If we think about this provision of public good on platform, because we already have crime data, and just a thought, why Airbnb just published maybe how safety this area is in the city with the public available crime data. So, and also if we think about what those consumers want to learn when they review the reviews, when they actually see the review, read the review. If for example, I think we both live in Los Angeles for quite a long, and we all know Santa Monica is very safe. We don't need to actually read the review to know this. So I mean, what I mean is for some very strong signal, or either very safe area or very unsafe area, so we may not need to acquire new information. Maybe you can think about for those intermediate level where the information from reviewers are more informative. I mean, I think that's maybe one way to consider. And also, please.
Yeah, those are very good thoughts. Just on whether Airbnb have incentive to publish the public crime data. First, I think there might be technical situation. That's every city may have different publications on the public crime data. And the reason that we only focus on 5 cities, because these are the only 5 cities that we can find public crime data. So from Airbnb's perspective, they already cover like hundreds of cities and hundreds of countries, right? And for them, it might be confusing when you have crime data in some places, but not others. And the interpretation of those data may differ by cities and so forth. So that's kind of a technical challenge. There may also be an economic challenge. I think if our estimation is right, they probably don't want to highlight the crime data, because that's going to probably scare away users and going to reduce their future revenue. I understand your point. That's sort of how informative the review is depends on the prior, right? If your prior is kind of somewhere in the middle, then this might be the most informative. It just, unfortunately, we have very little information about the guests. We don't know where they come from, and we don't know whether they are high income or low income, business or leisure, or it's just very hard to try to predict what's their prior. And by definition, they're going into an area that's away from home, right? So we don't know how informed they are about the destination's safety. We don't know to what extent they check out the city.gov or other kind of apps on local safety.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for really interesting conversation here. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is really, really preliminary study. This is our very first time presenting it outside of a university. So I really love to hear from you if you have any follow-up thoughts, especially on the research design or on other productive areas, directions we should look into. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Ginger. Thanks for your talk. I think we all learned a lot. Thanks again, and thanks everyone. Hope to see you soon in our future events at the Luohan Academy. Bye-bye, good morning and good evening.